My twins accidentally called a billionaire when I collapsed. He knew their voices but never knew they existed. The morning didn't feel unusual at first. Hazel stood in her small New Jersey kitchen with the sun sneaking through the blinds, laying soft stripes across the counter. Joshua and John were doing what they always did, arguing over which cartoon character got the bigger bowl of cereal. Their voices bounced around the room, sharp but familiar, the kind of noise that usually kept Hazel awake even when she barely slept. The eggs on the skillet sizzled. The boys kept nudging each other. The kettle rattled. Nothing about the room suggested trouble, until Hazel paused at the sink. She pressed a hand to her chest, slow and careful, like she didn't want the twins to notice. A strange tightness crawled up through her ribs. Her breath caught. She blinked at the running water, trying to steady herself. She'd pushed through exhaustion before, real estate workloads, late-night editing, early morning school prep, but something felt different this time. She reached for her coffee mug. It slipped from her hand. The crack of ceramic hitting the floor echoed louder than the boys shouting. Hazel jerked back at the sound, grabbing the counter with one trembling hand. Her knuckles whitened. Her eyes widened with confusion. Even the twins stopped arguing long enough to stare. For a moment, Hazel didn't move. She just braced herself and breathed through her teeth, shaky and uneven. Inside her head, a fear surfaced, the kind she hadn't allowed herself to think about out loud, not today. I can't fall apart today. She would never speak those words to her boys. But the truth clung to her face in the slight pull of her eyebrows and the tension around her mouth. Anyone carrying heavy responsibilities, work, kids, bills, pressure from every direction, would recognize that moment when your body tells you it's done, even if your mind refuses to quit. Hazel inhaled slowly, straightened her posture, and forced a smile for her sons. "Mommy's okay," she whispered, though her voice didn't land confidently. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. And her hand, the one resting on the counter, kept shaking. Something wasn't right. Even the air felt heavier. A question rose like a quiet alarm in the back of the viewer's mind. Why is her body giving out before her day has even begun? Hazel tried to take one step forward, but her vision thinned at the edges. The twins' chatter turned hollow and distant, like it was happening from another room. Her heart thudded too fast. "Lord, not now," she whispered. Her knees softened. Her balance slipped. The ground rushed up to meet her. Hazel collapsed. The phone slid off the counter and clattered across the floor. Joshua screamed. John scrambled toward her, tiny hands shaking as he tried to shake her shoulder. "Mommy, wake up!" Hazel heard their voices fading in and out, like someone turning a radio dial. She tried to answer, but her throat wouldn't cooperate. Joshua's feet pattered across the floor. John reached for the glowing phone screen, poking at it the way kids do when they've only seen grown-ups use it. His finger hit the green call button. A ring, a click. A man's voice came through, steady, calm, unaware his entire life was about to shift. "Hello?" Joshua's trembling voice broke the moment. "Mommy fell down." The man on the line froze. His breath caught. Something in their tiny voices tugged at him, something all too familiar. Voices he recognized without knowing how. Voices he had never known belonged to him. Before we move forward, if you're here listening to Hazel's story, tap the like button. Support helps stories like this reach someone who might need it. Drop a comment. It truly makes a difference. Welcome to Mr. Graham's Stories, where real stories meet real-life lessons. Every video is crafted to inspire, challenge, and stay with you long after it ends. If you believe in growth, second chances, and meaningful storytelling, you're home. Subscribe, like the video, and tell us the time and where you're watching from. Hazel lay on the kitchen floor, the cold tile pressing against her cheek. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The twin cereal bowls clinked somewhere above her. The cartoons hummed faintly from the living room, but even those familiar sounds felt strangely distant, as if the world were covered in thick glass. Her body wasn't responding the way she needed it to. Her fingers twitched. Her eyelashes fluttered. She tried to lift her head, but the room drifted sideways. Hazel's heart hammered so hard she felt each beat echo inside her ribcage, not in the dramatic way you see in movies, but in the quiet, frightening way a person recognizes their body slipping out of their control. Her breath wouldn't settle. Her chest tightened again. Her hands felt numb, almost hollow. She wanted to push up from the floor, but her arms gave out. Every muscle felt heavy, as if they belonged to someone else. Panic threatened to break through the fog in her mind, but she held it down, whispering a name she'd leaned on her whole life. "Lord, please, not now." Her voice cracked so softly that even she barely heard it. Joshua rushed into her line of vision. His small face hovered above hers, lips trembling. His eyes, usually full of mischief, were wide with fear. "Mommy, Mommy, get up," he begged, nudging her shoulder with gentle taps that grew more frantic. Hazel tried to answer him, to say, "Baby, it's okay," the way she always did. But only air escaped, trapped between her lips. The edges of her sight pulsed darker. Her thoughts drifted in and out like weak signals, memories flashing faster than she could grasp them. Her mother's hands braiding her hair, the boys' first steps, laughter in church hallways, their tiny fingers tugging at her shirt when they were babies, all the moments she carried alone, without ever asking anyone to lighten the load. Her vision blurred again. John's little hands cupped her face, warm and shaky. "Mommy, wake up," he whimpered, voice cracking. He didn't understand what was happening, but he felt the dread of it. 4-year-olds may not know medical terms, but they know when someone they love is slipping away from them. Hazel wanted to gather them both, to sit up and wrap her arms around them, to reassure them that she was still here, but her body didn't follow the command. Her knees twitched once, then stilled. Her breaths came in short bursts. She winced. The pain wasn't sharp, more like a tightening rope around her chest. She blinked again, fighting to stay present. She saw the boys, their panicked movements, their teary faces, the way their small bodies leaned toward her as if they could hold her with their will alone. Her internal world cracked right there, not from fear alone, but from the realization that she couldn't protect them in this moment. Hazel had been the rock, the anchor, the answer to every question, the fixer of every scraped knee and broken toy. Now her own body was collapsing under everything she'd carried. For the first time, she wasn't sure she could get up. The twins' cries grew sharper, echoing through her fogged mind. She closed her eyes just for a second, 1 second too long, and the world dipped again, as if the light dimmed behind a curtain. Joshua shook her arm with both hands now. "Mommy, please wake up," he cried. Hazel forced her eyes open. She could barely see them, shapes bending at the edges of her vision. She tried to whisper again, but nothing formed. A wave of dizziness crashed over her. Her legs curled slightly, then went limp. Everything inside her felt like it was flickering. That was the moment she lost control, the moment her strength slipped beyond her reach. Hazel didn't collapse because she was weak. She collapsed because she'd been strong alone for too long. And her body, usually so loyal, finally reached its breaking point. The phone hit the floor hard, landing just inches from Hazel's outstretched hand. The screen lit up with a soft glow, the only calm thing in a room suddenly filled with fear. Joshua stumbled toward it first, his small feet skidding against the tile. "Mommy needs help," he cried, his voice cracking in a way Hazel had never heard from him before. His tiny fingers hovered over the screen, unsure what to do. John crawled closer, tears collecting on his chin. His breaths came in sharp little hiccups. He nudged his brother aside and whispered, "I do it. I do it." He didn't know what he was doing, not really, but he knew they needed someone bigger, someone who could fix what they couldn't. Hazel tried to lift her hand to stop them, tried to guide them, but her arm barely lifted an inch off the floor. John tapped the glowing screen again. It shifted to the dialer. His finger hit a button, almost at random. A green circle blinked. A ring traveled through the air. Hazel heard it faintly, one beep, then another, like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. Joshua leaned close to the phone. His breath shook as he whispered, "Mommy fell down." His voice trembled so much the words broke apart. On the other end, a man answered, steady and composed. "Hello?" The tone wasn't rushed. It wasn't confused. It carried the energy of someone who handled emergencies with clarity. Someone used to being relied on. But Hazel didn't recognize the voice. Her consciousness thinned too much for her to place anything. Joshua flinched at the sound of the stranger. He looked at his brother unsure, then said louder, "Mommy, she on the floor." There was a pause, the kind of silence that carries sudden focus. "Slow down," the man said, his voice dropping into a controlled softness. "I'm here. Tell me what happened." The twins froze for a moment, overwhelmed. Hazel heard bits and pieces, her mind drifting in and out. John finally blurted the only thing his little brain could grab onto, the word that meant protect her, help her, the one adults call when something is wrong. Daddy. Silence cut through the call. Hazel's fogged mind barely registered it, but the man on the phone went completely still. His breath hitched. His tone shifted. Who said that? He asked, voice tightening in the smallest, sharpest way, not angry, but shaken. Joshua echoed it, desperate now. Daddy, Mommy fell. The man inhaled sharply, almost as if a memory punched him in the chest. Their voices, high, nervous, full of innocence, had a rhythm he recognized deep in his bones without understanding why. He didn't know them. He had never met them, but something inside him moved with certainty. Stay right there, he said. Don't move away from her. I'm on my way. The call ended abruptly. Hazel didn't understand that he wasn't just calling for help. He was racing toward the very truth she'd kept hidden for years. Moments later, outside the townhouse, tires screeched against the curb. A car door slammed. Heavy footsteps pounded up the walkway. The sound cut through the kitchen like another heartbeat joining the room. The twins looked up, startled. Hazel heard the latch twisting. She heard the door swing open. She heard a familiar voice, a voice she hadn't heard since the summer she fell for someone she never expected. Joshua, John. His voice broke on their names. Hazel's eyes fluttered toward the doorway. She saw the outline of a man in a suit, chest heaving, hair out of place for the first time in his life. His eyes scanned the room, stopping cold at the sight of her on the floor. For a second, the entire room held its breath. The boys ran toward him. He dropped to his knees beside Hazel before he even thought about it, one hand reaching for her forehead, the other trying to steady his own breathing. He knew those tiny voices. He didn't know he was their father. And nothing in his world, with all its wealth, order, and structure, had prepared him for the moment two children called him Daddy for the first time in their lives. Hazel woke up before her alarm, the same way she always did. Not because she wanted to, but because years of motherhood had trained her body to rise before responsibility came banging at her door. The room was dim, touched only by the faint orange of the streetlights outside her townhouse window. For a moment she lay still, letting the quiet settle over her. It was the only time of day when nothing demanded her attention. But quiet never lasted long. A soft thud came from the hallway. Then another, followed by the unmistakable whisper shout of Joshua trying to wake his brother without waking her. John, get up. Mommy said we got school. Hazel smiled despite herself. Those two never whispered correctly. Their voices always carried more heart than volume control. She swung her legs off the bed, feeling the familiar pull in her lower back, the reminder that she'd carried twins full term and had been carrying the world ever since. She rubbed her palms over her eyes, took a slow breath, and stood. She didn't bother looking in the mirror. She already knew she'd see shadows beneath her eyes from the late night she spent editing a property listing and returning client messages. Real estate didn't sleep, and neither did single motherhood. She opened her bedroom door to find Joshua standing there in mismatched socks, hair pointing in every direction like he'd wrestled with the pillow and lost. Mommy, I hungry, he announced. Baby, it's 6:30, she replied gently. I still hungry, he insisted, rubbing his stomach with the dramatic flair of someone who believed he was starving. John peeked from behind his brother, clutching his worn stuffed elephant, the one Hazel had given each of them when they were babies. Somehow, his had survived every wash cycle, every drop into a puddle, every night he'd cried into it. Hazel reached out and smoothed Joshua's hair. All right, let's get breakfast started. They marched ahead of her toward the kitchen, their footsteps light and energetic. Hazel followed more slowly, feeling a tight pull beneath her ribcage. It wasn't painful, just unusual enough to make her pause for half a second. She brushed it off and continued. The kitchen was small but warm, painted a soft yellow she'd chosen herself last year after a long afternoon of bargain hunting at a home improvement store. The counters were cluttered with yesterday's mail, crayon drawings, and a half-built Lego tower that the boys had insisted must stay right there forever. The twins climbed onto their usual chairs at the table, Joshua swinging his legs while John rested his chin on the table's edge. Hazel turned on the stove, cracked a few eggs into the pan, and reached for the cereal box. I want the blue bowl, Joshua shouted. No, that's my bowl, John argued. They went back and forth, voices rising with each exchange until Hazel stepped between them. Boys, she said firmly, we're grateful for breakfast, not fighting about bowls. They quieted as they always did when she used that particular tone, gentle but grounded in love. She poured cereal into 2 identical bowls, hoping it would avoid another argument. The eggs hissed behind her on the pan. The morning news murmured from the small TV on the counter, but she didn't pay attention. Her mind was already running through the day's tasks. Meet a client at 9, photograph a listing by noon, pick the boys up at 3, grocery run at 4, church meeting at 6. Too much. Always too much. But she'd learned to survive on determination and prayer. She reached for her mug and poured her coffee. The smell alone usually woke her up, but today it didn't cut through the heaviness in her head. Hazel leaned on the counter, letting her shoulders drop for a moment before she turned back toward the stove. The twins were already making a mess with their cereal, but that was nothing new. She wiped her hands on a towel and moved to serve the eggs. That's when it happened. A sudden wave rolled through her chest, a tightening, faint but definite. She paused, fingers curling around the edge of the counter. Not now, she told herself. Not today. She blinked several times, trying to clear the dizziness that washed over her unexpectedly. The kitchen lights brightened and dimmed at the edges of her vision. She inhaled deeply, but even that felt off, like her lungs had to work harder. Joshua noticed first. "Mommy, why you look like that?" Hazel forced a smile she didn't feel. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Mommy's just tired." But underneath that practiced calm was a truth she didn't want to admit, not to them, and barely to herself. Her body was warning her. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was something deeper, something she had ignored too many times. She steadied herself, placing both palms flat on the counter. The room wavered again. Her breath caught. Her heart skipped. The internal crack, the one she'd been holding at bay for months, finally made itself known. She whispered under her breath, "Lord, help me." But this time, it wasn't enough to keep the ground steady beneath her feet. The dizziness deepened, wrapping around her like a slow-moving tide. She tried to push through it, the way she pushed through everything else, but her body wasn't cooperating. She closed her eyes for 1 second to regain her balance. That was her mistake. Her knees softened. Her hand slipped off the counter. Her body dipped forward before she realized she was falling. The boys watched her with wide eyes as she fought to remain upright, unaware that the moment their day shifted was already unfolding in front of them. Hazel reached out blindly for the counter, but her fingers brushed only air. Her knees folded before her mind registered what was happening. The skillet popped behind her, the eggs hissing sharply as if the pan itself reacted to her losing control. Her body hit the kitchen floor with a dull thud. Not dramatic, not loud, just the sound of a woman whose strength finally slipped. Joshua dropped his spoon. It clattered onto the table, splashing milk onto his shirt. "Mommy," he yelled, sliding off his chair so fast he nearly fell too. John stared, frozen for a moment, gripping his stuffed elephant with both hands. His bottom lip trembled, his breath shaky and uneven, a little whimper pushing through his throat. Hazel could hear them, but everything around her was warped, muffled, as though she were underwater. The ceiling lights blurred into one long streak above her. She blinked, tried to say their names, but her voice barely formed a sound. She was aware of the cold tile beneath her cheek, the roughness of crumbs under her palm, the faint smell of burnt eggs. Her chest tightened again, deeper this time, pulling the air from her lungs like a slow vacuum. She tried to lift her head. It barely moved. Joshua reached her first, his little hand touching her shoulder with a frantic shake. "Mommy, wake up! Mommy, get up!" he cried, voice cracking as fear climbed higher in his throat. Hazel wanted to gather him close, to soothe him, to say something, anything, but the words stayed inside her. Her mouth opened without sound. Her breath came in short, rapid gasps she couldn't control. "Mommy," John whispered, finally breaking free from his frozen stance. He shuffled forward on his knees, placing his elephant against Hazel's chest as though it could comfort her the way it comforted him. "Mommy, hold Danny. He help you." Hazel's heart cracked at that tiny gesture, but she still couldn't lift her arms. Her vision dimmed at the edges. The twins moved around her in frantic, unsteady motions. Joshua kept tapping her shoulder while tears slipped down his cheeks. John crawled toward the counter where her phone lay face down but glowing faintly. "Get it, get it, get it," he muttered, repeating himself like a mantra he didn't fully understand. Hazel tried to direct them, even silently, but her body refused to cooperate. Her breath hitched again. She squeezed her eyes shut against the pulsing ache building behind her temples. John grabbed the phone, fingers fumbling as the screen came to life under his touch. He didn't know what number to dial. He didn't know who to call, but he'd seen Hazel swipe and touch the screen enough times to mimic the motion with shaky guesses. The keypad opened. His small finger tapped the first icon he recognized, a green circle. The call began. Hazel heard the faint ring echo from somewhere near her left side. The distant tone barely pierced the fog in her mind, but her heart lurched with the instinct to respond. Joshua scooted closer to the phone, still crying, still holding onto her hand, even though her grip was limp. The ringing stopped. A voice answered. Hello. Calm, clear, adult. Not familiar to the twins, but familiar to someone who once spent a warm summer night laughing with Hazel under string lights. Hazel's eyelashes fluttered. She heard the voice too, but it reached her like a whisper stretched across miles. Joshua leaned forward and shouted into the phone without thinking, My mommy fell down. Help! Help her! On the other end, the man inhaled sharply. His tone shifted at once from casual curiosity to concern. Slow down. Tell me what happened. Joshua didn't understand the question. He only knew desperation. Mommy won't get up. Hazel tried to force her eyes open again. The twins' faces hovered above her, distorted, scared. She could sense the man's growing alarm through the phone, even through the haze of her fading awareness. Are you alone? The man asked gently. John clutched the phone in both hands, hiccuping as he tried to speak. We don't know. We don't know. Mommy fell. His voice dissolved into sobs. Hazel wanted to reassure them, wanted to tell them help was coming, but she felt herself sliding away again, drifting into a strange space where sound became softer, lighter, like she was losing her grip on the world around her. Listen to me, the man said, voice firmer now. Stay right beside her, okay? Don't move away. Joshua sniffled hard and nodded, even though the man couldn't see him. Okay. Then came the word that turned the man's world upside down. John pressed the phone against his cheek and cried out, Daddy, help! Hazel's eyes shot open, not wide, but enough to register that word. A spike of fear rushed through her. Not because the boys said it, they didn't know any better, but because of who heard it. Silence filled the line. A silence thick enough that even the boys sensed the shift. What did you just call me? The man asked, his voice cracking faintly. Joshua echoed the cry, sobbing harder now. Daddy, Mommy needs you. Daddy, come now. Hazel tried to lift her head, tried to stop the moment she had spent 4 years hiding from, but her arms wouldn't support her weight. Her body was too far gone. On the phone, the man spoke again, not calm this time, but shaken to his core. Stay where you are. Do not leave her side. I'm on my way. The call ended. Hazel's eyes closed as her strength flickered again. She could hear the twins crying, clutching her arms, begging her to wake up. Her breathing faltered. Joshua collapsed against her chest, sobbing into her shirt. John held her face in both hands, rocking slightly the way he'd seen her rock him when he was scared. Mommy, don't go, he whispered. A sound broke through the house minutes later. Tires grinding against pavement, a door slamming shut, fast footsteps pounding toward the front door. The twins looked toward the hallway, confused but hopeful. Hazel didn't see him, but she heard a voice she hadn't heard in years, breathless, terrified, and calling her sons names like they belonged to him. Joshua, John. The front door burst open with a force Hazel had never heard in her home. The sound cracked through the hallway, startling the twins and sending John scrambling to his feet with the phone still clutched in his fist. Joshua pressed closer to Hazel's arm, wiping his face with the back of his hand as he looked toward the doorway. Heavy footsteps pounded across the hardwood floor, purposeful, frantic, unmistakably adult. The figure that emerged into the kitchen doorway froze for a single breath, taking in the sight in front of him. Bradley. His suit jacket was half unbuttoned, his tie pulled loose as if he'd yanked it free on his way over. His usually composed expression was shattered, replaced by raw fear and disbelief. His eyes scanned the room in a single sweep, landing on the twins first, their tear-streaked faces, their trembling hands, their identical worried expressions. Then his gaze dropped to Hazel. Her body lay limp on the kitchen floor, one hand curled slightly toward her chest, the other stretched outward as though she had fought to hold herself up. Her skin looked paler than he remembered, her breath shallow, her eyelashes barely fluttering. For Bradley, the world narrowed to a single point. Hazel? His voice cracked. It wasn't polished or smooth the way he usually spoke. It was the voice of a man whose certainty had just been ripped away. Hazel, can you hear me? Joshua sniffled loudly and crawled toward him, tugging at Bradley's pant leg. "Daddy, Mommy fell. She fell and she won't get up." Bradley blinked at the word again, Daddy. As if trying to make sense of a foreign language he somehow understood instinctively. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. The boys' frightened voices echoed in his ears, and in that moment, despite the confusion and the shock, something deep inside him shifted. He knelt beside Hazel, hands trembling as he reached for her forehead. Her skin was cool, clammy. Her breathing shallow. "Hazel," he whispered, leaning closer. "I'm here. I'm right here." Her eyelids stirred at the sound of his voice, barely lifting. "Brad." The rest of his name dissolved into a weak breath. He swallowed hard. Hearing her speak, even that much sliced through him. He hadn't seen her in years, yet the sound of her saying his name still hit him with the same force it had when they stood under those lights on that summer night. He brushed a loose curl away from her cheek, his thumb trembling. "It's okay. I've got you." Hazel blinked slowly, trying to focus her vision. The edges of the room blended together, but Bradley's face, she recognized that silhouette immediately. For a split second, shock flickered in her eyes. Then relief. Then fear. The twins hovered beside them, unsure whether to move closer or stay still. John squeezed Hazel's hand gently, whispering to her the same way she whispered to him at night when he had bad dreams. Bradley looked at the boys, truly looked at them, for the first time. Identical small faces, curly hair, Hazel's soft eyes. His own smile reflected back at him in the tiniest, purest form. His breath caught. He reached out a hand toward them without thinking. Joshua stepped forward. John hesitated, then mirrored his brother. Bradley didn't pick them up. He didn't know their boundaries yet, but he rested a steady hand on each of their backs, the gesture instinctive and surprisingly natural. "Hey," he murmured, voice gentle. "You two did the right thing calling for help." Joshua nodded, though he looked more confused than reassured. John held onto Hazel's sleeve, refusing to let go. Bradley swallowed again and looked back at Hazel. His voice lowered. "You scared them, and you scared me." Hazel tried to speak, but her breath caught halfway. Her eyes fluttered shut again, her throat tightening. Bradley placed a hand on her shoulder, his thumb brushing over the fabric of her shirt. "Stay with me," he said softly. "Don't drift off. Just stay." Hazel's lips parted, forming a faint whisper. "The boys, are they okay?" "They're right here," he said, glancing at them with a steadier expression. "They're safe." The twins leaned closer to her, each resting a small hand on her arm. Hazel exhaled shakily, the tension in her body easing a fraction. Bradley looked around the room, taking in the details he'd missed on his way in. The small chairs at the table, the twin drawings taped to the refrigerator, the stack of breakfast dishes waiting to be washed. Pieces of a life Hazel had built alone, a life he had never known existed. His chest tightened with something he couldn't name yet. Guilt, awe, regret, fear, realization, all tangled together. "How long has this been happening?" he whispered, almost to himself. Hazel didn't answer. She couldn't. Her strength wavered again as another wave of dizziness hit her. Bradley reacted instantly, lifting her head slightly and guiding her to rest against his knee. "It's okay," he said again, though his own voice trembled. "Help is on the way." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing closer. Joshua looked at the doorway, covering his ears. "It's loud. It means they're coming to help your mommy," Bradley explained gently. The sirens grew louder, the blue lights flashing against the window blinds. For the first time since Hazel collapsed, John's shoulders relaxed a little. Hazel blinked slowly, struggling to stay alert. Her eyes drifted from the twins to Bradley. Their gazes met. This time, Hazel didn't look away. There was no escaping the truth reflected back at her, not in the twins' frightened faces, not in Bradley's trembling hands, not in the way his eyes softened when they landed on the boys who carried pieces of him. Bradley breathed out the words without meaning to, so quietly it was almost a confession to himself. "They look just like..." He couldn't finish. Not now. Not while she was fighting to stay conscious. The paramedics rushed into the kitchen seconds later, but Bradley didn't move until one of them gently tapped his shoulder. "Sir, we'll take it from here." He lifted Hazel carefully into their hands, his fingers brushing her cheek one last time before they eased her onto the stretcher. Joshua cried again. John clutched his elephant tight. As they carried Hazel out of the kitchen, Bradley stood still for a moment, watching the woman he once lost, the woman he had never forgotten, and the mother of the boys he had just discovered. Then he finally let the truth settle into his bones. He had arrived at her home as a stranger, but two small voices had called him Daddy, and somewhere deep inside, he knew they weren't wrong. The hospital waiting room hummed with the low, constant noise of activity, phones ringing at the nurse's station, footsteps rushing across polished floors, muted conversations blending into a soft buzz. But for Bradley, everything felt strangely silent. Time moved in slow motion, as if the world outside were running at a different pace from the storm inside his chest. He sat forward on the edge of the plastic chair, elbows resting on his knees, fingers interlocked so tightly his knuckles turned pale. Joshua sat on his right, curled up against his arm, eyes half closed from crying. John sat on his left, clutching his stuffed elephant against his chest as if letting it go might make everything worse. Bradley kept glancing at the hallway where they had taken Hazel moments ago. Each time he looked, he felt a new wave of helplessness crawl up his spine. A nurse approached him. Her tone was professional, cautious. "Sir, are you the patient's spouse or partner?" Bradley blinked, caught off guard. Spouse? Partner? He opened his mouth ready to answer, but no words came out at first. He looked at the twins, their matching curls, their wide brown eyes, the identical bump on their chins. He swallowed. He paused, forcing himself to breathe. "No, I'm not her partner. I'm someone she knows." The nurse's eyes drifted to the twins, who looked so small and out of place in the oversized waiting room chairs. She lowered her voice. "And these boys, are they hers?" "Yes," he said softly. "Are they yours?" She continued, careful but direct. Bradley froze again. His breath caught, tightening in his throat. He didn't know how to answer. Not truthfully. Not yet. Joshua looked up at the nurse. "We called Daddy," he said quietly, rubbing his eyes with the back of his fist. "Daddy came." Bradley's heart clenched at the sound of that word. Not because it felt wrong, but because it felt too right. The nurse nodded, offering a gentle smile. "All right. We'll make sure you three stay together." She walked off, leaving Bradley alone with the boys and the weight of that unanswered question. He rubbed his forehead, trying to steady himself. Every breath he took felt shallow, almost as if the air in the room wasn't enough. Hazel collapsed on her kitchen floor, barely breathing. And the twins, his twins, calling him Daddy. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. The sterile lights above reminded him of something else, another place, another summer, another moment when Hazel had looked at him with a softness he hadn't seen since. A flashback took hold. He remembered the block party, music drifting through warm air, lights strung between lampposts, Hazel laughing with her head thrown back. She wore a simple sundress that night, one that caught the breeze and moved with her every step. Her smile had been bright enough to make him forget every responsibility waiting for him in the morning. They danced near the curb where kids played with chalk. Hazel's laughter mixed with the music, and he remembered thinking how effortless it felt to be beside her. He hadn't planned anything. He hadn't expected anything. He had simply let himself fall into a moment that felt like freedom. They talked about dreams, hers filled with passion, his tangled in obligation. She told him she loved how he looked at the world as if it could grow if you pushed it hard enough. He told her she reminded him of everything he didn't know he needed. The memory slipped forward, the warmth of her hand in his, the soft light on her skin, the quiet breath she took before leaning into him. Then it all faded into the present again. The hospital, the cold light, the twins sitting on either side of him. Bradley let out a long, shaky breath. Joshua tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, is Mommy okay?" The innocence in his voice hit Bradley straight in the chest. "I hope so," he said softly. "The doctors are helping her, but will she wake up?" John asked, eyes wide with fear. Bradley reached out instinctively, placing an arm around both boys. They leaned into him immediately, as though their bodies recognized a safety they didn't yet understand. "She's strong," Bradley told them. "Your mommy is very strong. She's going to fight to wake up." He didn't know if that was true, but he needed them to hold on to something. And deep down, he needed to hold on to it too. A different nurse approached with a clipboard. She looked between Bradley and the twins. "Sir, I need some information for the patient's file." Bradley nodded. "Okay. Her full name?" "Hazel," he replied, voice steady but softer than before. "And your name?" He hesitated for a moment. Bradley. And your relationship to the patient? That question again. He felt the twins' bodies stiffen beside him. He looked down at them, two small boys clinging to him as if he had always been theirs. He thought of Hazel lying unconscious, of all the years he didn't know he'd missed. He cleared his throat. I don't know how to answer that right now, he admitted quietly. The nurse nodded, understanding the weight behind those words without pressing further. I'll update you when the doctor comes out, she said, walking away. The twins leaned closer against Bradley's sides. Their breathing slowed, their fists unclenched slightly. Exhaustion tugged at their eyelids, but neither dared to fully rest. Not until they saw Hazel. Bradley looked at them, one on each side of him, their small fingers gripping his sleeves like anchors. He exhaled slowly. The truth he had run from years ago, the truth he didn't even know existed, now sat pressed against him in two warm, frightened little bodies. He wasn't sure what Hazel would say when she woke. He wasn't sure what he would say either. But he knew one thing. Whatever happened next, he wasn't walking away again. Not from Hazel. Not from these boys. Not from this truth that had waited 4 long years to find him. The steady rhythm of a heart monitor beeped through the dim hospital room. Soft light seeped in from the hallway, casting a glow over Hazel's still form. She lay propped slightly against crisp white pillows, her curls scattered messily around her face, her breathing shallow but calmer than before. Bradley sat in the chair beside her bed. He hadn't moved much since they brought her in. His elbows rested on his knees, hands clasped together so tightly it looked painful. His eyes remained fixed on Hazel. Every rise and fall of her chest counted, memorized. Joshua and John were curled up on the couch in the corner, finally asleep after crying themselves into exhaustion. Bradley kept glancing at them too, unable to stop doing it, as if checking they were real. Hazel stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, opening slowly, as though returning to her own body, piece by piece. She blinked against the hospital light, confused at first, then alarmed. Her eyes darted around, searching. When they landed on Bradley, her breath caught. "Bradley," she whispered, voice cracking. He shot up from his chair and leaned closer. "I'm here," he said gently, his tone stripped of every polished layer he normally carried. "Hazel, you're okay. You're safe." She swallowed, her throat dry. "The boys, where?" "They're right there," he murmured, pointing to the couch behind him. "They're sleeping. They haven't left your side since we got here." Her eyes softened the moment she saw them, little bodies curled into each other, shoes still on, cheeks sticky from dried tears. Relief washed over her like warmth she didn't know she still had inside. But as soon as that relief came, something else tightened in her chest. Fear. Hazel shifted her gaze back to Bradley. His face was closer than she expected. His eyes held questions, heavy ones, questions she had managed to avoid for years. She looked away. Bradley noticed. His voice lowered to a calm, steady whisper. "Hazel, what happened to you? Why didn't you tell anyone you weren't feeling well?" Hazel squeezed her eyes shut, embarrassed. "I didn't want to worry them. I thought I could handle it." "You collapsed," Bradley said, barely controlling the tremor in his voice. "You scared those boys. You scared me." Hazel's eyes snapped open at the last part. "You," she echoed, almost disbelieving. Bradley nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, me." Hazel's breathing grew uneven again. But not from her illness. This was emotional, a collision of shame, vulnerability, and the reality she had run from. "Why are you here?" she whispered, voice trembling. "You shouldn't be here, Bradley. This isn't your life. It hasn't been for years." Bradley leaned back slightly, taken aback. "Hazel, they called me." She froze. A quiet dread slid into her stomach. What do you mean? How?" He exhaled, remembering the panic in the boys' voices. "Your phone must have dialed me when it fell. I heard them crying. I heard Joshua saying you were on the floor." Hazel lifted a shaky hand to her face, covering her eyes in embarrassment. "Oh, God." "And then," Bradley continued softly, "I heard John call me Daddy." Hazel's hand dropped from her face. She stared at him, stunned, exposed. Her throat tightened. They don't understand what that word means. They just needed help." "I know," Bradley said carefully. "But hearing it, Hazel, it did something to me." She looked away again, heart pounding. Everything she had kept locked behind silence now stood between them in plain sight. Bradley's voice broke the stillness. When I got to your house and saw them up close." Hazel visibly braced herself. "They look like me," he said quietly. "Not just a little, not in some vague way. Hazel, they look like me." Hazel felt the truth loosen inside her chest, pushing upward like a confession long overdue. "I know," she whispered. Bradley leaned closer. "Hazel, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say anything?" She swallowed hard. "Because you left. I didn't leave you," he said immediately. "Hazel, I didn't even know." "You went back the next day," she cut in, her voice cracking under the weight of 4 years of unspoken truth. "You didn't call, you didn't text, you didn't come looking. I told myself you moved on, and I had to accept it." Bradley felt her words like a hit to the chest. Hazel continued, her voice shaky. "When I found out I was pregnant, everything changed. I told myself I could do it alone. I told myself I had to. I wasn't going to chase a man who didn't choose me, especially not when I was carrying 2 babies. Bradley closed his eyes for a moment, devastated. "I didn't choose anyone," he whispered. "I chose what my family expected. I chose the safe route. I didn't choose you because I was too scared." Hazel inhaled sharply. "I'm sorry," Bradley said, voice cracking. "If I had known, Hazel, if I had known, nothing would have kept me away. Nothing." Hazel let out a breath she'd been holding for 4 years. Silence settled between them, fragile but honest. Bradley slowly sat back down, resting his forearms on his knees again. "Hazel, I need to ask you something. And I need the truth." She nodded weakly. "Are Joshua and John my sons?" Her breath hitched. Her fingers curled into the blanket. Her eyes filled instantly, not with fear, but with the release of a secret she could no longer carry. "Yes," she whispered. The word hung in the room, trembling. Bradley's body stilled completely. Hazel looked down at her hands. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to interrupt your world with something so big. I didn't want you to feel trapped or obligated or angry." Bradley let out a shaky breath. "Hazel, I could never be angry about having sons. What hurts is that I missed 4 years of their lives." Tears slipped down Hazel's cheeks. "I know," she said. "I know. I punished myself for that every day. But I was scared, Bradley. I built this life with them. I didn't want to open the door to anything unstable." He softened immediately at the word unstable. He leaned forward, placed a hand on hers. "Hazel, I'm not running again. I'm here. I'm staying. I want to know them. I want to know you again, too, if you'll let me." Her chin trembled. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't pull her hand back either. Bradley squeezed her hand gently. "We'll figure out everything else," he whispered. "But no more secrets between us. Not after this." Hazel finally lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes with raw honesty. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she said. "But maybe it happened the only way it could." Bradley nodded slowly, his expression tender. "Hazel, the truth didn't break us. It brought me to you." She let out a breath, shaky, but filled with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. The room settled into a softer silence after Hazel's confession. The kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but full, heavy with truth, yet strangely freeing. Bradley held Hazel's hand like he was afraid letting go would undo everything he had just heard. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply breathed the same air for the first time in years, as 2 people connected by something far bigger than the summer that started it all. A soft shuffle broke the stillness. Joshua stretched on the couch, pushing his heel into John's side. John mumbled in his sleep, hugging his stuffed elephant closer. The sound pulled Hazel's gaze to her boys, and her breath softened at the sight of them, the 2 people who had kept her going day after day, night after night. Bradley followed her gaze. His expression shifted again. Less shock, less confusion, more something she hadn't seen in him before. Something deeper, something achingly gentle. His eyes softened, and his posture lowered as though he instinctively wanted to move toward them. Hazel watched him quietly, aware that this moment was not hers alone to carry anymore. This was his moment too, one she had denied him for years but could no longer withhold. "Bradley," she whispered, voice still fragile, "they're good boys, kind, curious, strong. They're everything I hoped they'd be." He swallowed hard. "I can see that," he murmured. "Do you want to?" Hazel tilted her head slightly toward the couch. Bradley didn't move right away. He looked almost afraid, not of the boys, but of what acknowledging them would mean for the rest of his life. Hazel could see the exact second he made the decision. He stood slowly, brushing his palms down the sides of his pants as though preparing himself for something sacred. His steps toward the couch were careful, quiet, and deliberate. He crouched beside them, resting one hand on the edge of the cushion for balance. Joshua woke first. His eyes blinked open, confused, then widened when he saw Bradley kneeling beside him. "Daddy?" he asked, voice small, unsure if he was allowed to say it again. Bradley's eyes glistened. He swallowed hard. "Yeah," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm here." Joshua sat up immediately and threw his arms around Bradley's neck with the kind of trust only a child could give so freely. Bradley froze for half a heartbeat, overwhelmed, then wrapped his arms around the little boy with a tenderness that surprised even him. The contact felt natural, like stepping into something that should have always been there. John stirred next, rubbing his eyes with the back of his fist. "Joshua, why you—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Bradley hugging his brother. His mouth fell open slightly. For a moment he just stared, trying to understand if this was real or if he was dreaming. Bradley turned toward him slowly. John clutched his elephant tight, eyes uncertain, but hopeful. "Hey," Bradley said gently. "Come here." John didn't hesitate. He dropped the elephant, scrambled across the couch, and wrapped his little arms around Bradley's waist. Bradley gathered him up, pulling both boys close, one arm around each of them. Hazel watched from the hospital bed. Her chest tightened, not with pain this time, but with a mix of awe, regret, and gratitude. This was the moment she had imagined many nights, the moment she never allowed herself to believe could happen. The boys nestled against Bradley, as if they'd been waiting their whole lives for arms that fit them this way. John mumbled into Bradley's chest, "Mommy didn't wake up. We scared." Bradley smoothed a hand over his curls. "I know. You two were very brave." Joshua sniffled. "We called you." Bradley nodded slowly. "I heard you. I came as fast as I could." Hazel's eyes filled again, emotions swelling too fast to contain. She covered her mouth with trembling fingers as she watched Bradley hold their sons, really hold them, with the tenderness of a man discovering a piece of himself he never knew was missing. Bradley looked over his shoulder at her. This time, Hazel didn't look away. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all the years you missed. I didn't know how to tell you without complicating everything." Bradley shook his head gently, still holding the boys. "No. I should have found my own courage years ago. I should have come back for you. I let other people's expectations pull me away from something real." Hazel wiped a tear from her cheek. "I didn't want to force you into something you weren't ready for, and I didn't want to admit I already cared more than I knew how to handle," he replied softly. The boys looked between them, confused by the emotional weight in the room but sensing something important. Joshua tugged at Bradley's sleeve. "Daddy, you gonna stay?" Bradley froze slightly, not because he doubted the answer, but because hearing the question from a child who had never been given stability from a father figure landed deep. He cupped Joshua's cheek. "Yes," he said, voice steady. "I'm staying." John looked up. "No leaving?" Bradley kissed the top of his head. "No leaving." Hazel turned her face away for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight. The sons she had raised alone finally held by the man they had every right to know. Bradley gently placed the boys back on the couch and stood. They stayed watching him, almost as if afraid he'd disappear if they blinked. He walked back toward Hazel's bed. She tried to sit up, but the effort made her wince. Bradley moved immediately, adjusting her pillow, supporting her back with slow, careful movements. "You don't have to do that," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly, "but I want to." Hazel looked into his eyes, searching for hesitation, for uncertainty, for anything that suggested this moment was temporary. She found none. A nurse peeked in briefly, checking vitals, adjusting Hazel's monitor, then left with a nod, leaving them alone again. Bradley took Hazel's hand slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. "I miss so much," he said, voice low. "Their first words, their first steps, birthdays, everything. And that's on me as much as it is on circumstance." Hazel's voice softened. "You didn't know." "I know now," he replied, "and I'm not losing another moment." Hazel studied his face, the sincerity there, the regret, the determination. She felt something in her chest begin to settle after years of tension. Quiet stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full of meaning. Bradley looked over at the twins again, watching them, memorizing them, then back at Hazel. "Hazel," he said softly, "this changes everything." Hazel inhaled carefully. "I know, but it doesn't scare me," he added. Her eyes flickered with surprise. "Not anymore." For the first time since waking, Hazel let herself breathe fully, a long, steady breath that loosened the fear clinging to her ribs. Bradley leaned slightly closer. "I'm here," he repeated softly. "Not because they called me, but because I choose to be." Hazel's eyes glistened. Not from pain, from relief. The twins shifted on the couch, watching their mother and the man who had become their anchor in one unexpected morning. Bradley turned toward them, offering a gentle smile. "Before we continue," he said warmly, "I want to know something." The boys perked up. He crouched again so he was at their level. "Can I get to know you? Really know you?" Joshua nodded enthusiastically. John mirrored him, clutching his elephant. Hazel closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the scene settle deep inside her. This wasn't just a father meeting his sons. This was a family taking its first real breath together. The morning sun crept through the blinds in Hazel's hospital room, painting soft stripes across the floor. Hazel had drifted back to sleep, her body still recovering from the collapse, her breaths steady but slow. Bradley stood near the window, staring out at the parking lot below, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. He'd been up all night, not because he couldn't sleep, but because every time he closed his eyes he saw Hazel hitting the floor, the twins screaming, the phone shaking in John's tiny hands. He set the coffee down and checked on the boys. They were curled together on the narrow couch, using Bradley's suit jacket as a blanket. He had draped it over them hours ago without thinking. Now, watching them breathe in sync, something in him softened again. He turned back toward the window, pulling out his phone. 24 missed messages lit the screen. His assistant asking about meetings, his board requesting documents, his corporate team waiting for approvals. Normally, he would have responded instantly. Today, he didn't even open them. He typed a single message to his assistant. "Cancel everything for the next few days. Personal emergency." He turned off the phone. When he looked back toward Hazel, he felt a tug inside him he didn't fully understand. Something protective, something full, something overdue. A knock sounded at the door. A nurse walked in quietly, checking Hazel's vitals. She offered Bradley a polite smile before glancing at the twins. "They're holding up well," she whispered. "Better than I expected," Bradley admitted. "You're doing a good job keeping them calm." He nodded, but didn't respond. He wasn't used to praise in this area. He'd never practiced fatherhood, but something about caring for them felt natural. Hazel stirred. Her eyes opened weakly, adjusting to the light. She blinked a few times before focusing on Bradley. "You're still here," she said softly. "Of course I'm here," he replied. Hazel slowly pushed herself up, wincing as she adjusted her pillow. "You don't have to." "Yes," Bradley interrupted gently. "I do." She looked down at her hands, uneasy. "It's been a long night. You probably have things to take care of. I canceled everything." Hazel's head snapped up. "You what?" "I canceled my meetings," he said plainly. "My assistant is handling the rest." Hazel shook her head slowly, unsure how to process that. "Bradley, your life is complicated. You run a company. You have responsibilities." "Hazel," he said, stepping closer, "I have new responsibilities now. Real ones." Her breath caught for a moment. His seriousness unnerved her, not because she didn't want him there, but because she didn't know how to let someone step into a space she'd controlled alone for so long. Bradley took a slow breath. "Can I ask you something?" Hazel braced herself. "Go ahead." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you reach out at least once?" Hazel looked down again, fingers twisting in the blanket. "Because I didn't want to disrupt your world." "My world," he repeated, stepping closer, "should have included them. Should have included you." She shook her head. "You were headed toward a certain kind of life. Expectations, family plans, business obligations. I didn't fit into any of that." "You didn't think I deserved to know?" Hazel's voice cracked. "I thought knowing would make everything harder for you, and harder for them." Bradley lowered himself into the chair beside her bed, his posture quietly tense. "Hazel, harder doesn't mean impossible. Harder doesn't mean wrong. She didn't respond. He continued, slower this time. Do you have any idea how many nights I thought about finding you again? Not just because of that night we spent, but because something about you stayed with me. And now I find out I have 2 sons who've gone 4 years without me. Hazel looked away, tears building. I'm sorry. Bradley exhaled deeply. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for honesty. What were you afraid of? She pressed her lips together, then finally answered. Judgment. From your world, from mine. People talk. They always do when it comes to mothers like me. Bradley froze. Mothers like you, he repeated. Hazel nodded slowly. A black woman raising twins alone? People see weakness where there's strength. They assume things. They make comments. They measure your worth before you open your mouth. Bradley sat back, absorbing that. Hazel continued. And you? You walk into any room and people see success, stability, a future. Mixing those 2 worlds. I didn't think it could work. I didn't want them growing up feeling like outsiders in both. Bradley rubbed a hand over his face, struggling with the weight of her words. Hazel, he said softly, if the world judges us, it'll have to learn. Because I'm here now, and I'm not letting fear decide anything. Hazel searched his face looking for cracks, arrogance, pity, uncertainty, but found none. What about your family? She asked quietly. Your circles, the people who expect you to show up a certain way? A flicker of tension crossed Bradley's face. They'll have opinions, he admitted. They always do, but they don't get to dictate who I show up for. Hazel sighed, leaning back against the pillows. It's not that simple. Maybe not, he agreed. But it doesn't have to be complicated either. Silence settled between them, soft, thoughtful, full of things neither of them knew how to say yet. The boys stirred on the couch, shifting under the jacket. Bradley turned to look at them and felt something inside him shift again, deeper this time. Something that wasn't going away. Hazel watched him, watching them. You're really willing to stay? She asked softly. Bradley turned back toward her. I'm not just staying for today. I'm here for as long as it takes. For them. For you. Hazel's chest rose and fell unevenly. Bradley stepped closer, lowering his voice. Hazel. A family doesn't form perfectly. It forms honestly. And we're here now, all of us, whether we planned it or not. Hazel closed her eyes briefly, letting the moment sink into her. Everything she'd feared, judgment, pain, abandonment, tangled with something new, hope. Bradley watched her with a steady tenderness. Hazel, he whispered, I'm stepping in, not to take over your world, but to join it. She opened her eyes. This time, she didn't look away. Hazel sat quietly against the pillows after Bradley's last words, her eyes drifting toward the window where morning lights spilled into the room. She let the soft glow land on her face. She needed the warmth, needed something steady to hold on to. Because inside, she was far from steady. Bradley stood a few feet away from her, pacing slowly, running a hand through his hair the way he always did when he was deep in thought. Hazel watched him without speaking. She didn't know what scared her more, how much he'd already stepped in, or how natural it already felt to have him there. She exhaled softly, grounding herself. The twins were still sleeping on the couch, curled into each other like 2 pieces of the same heartbeat. Their presence filled the room even in sleep. They were her reason for everything, her sacrifices, her silence, her strength. Bradley finally stopped pacing and looked at Hazel. You're quiet, he said gently. Talk to me. Hazel swallowed. I don't know where to start. Start anywhere, he replied. I'm not going anywhere. There it was again, the promise he kept making. Each time he said it, something inside Hazel tightened, then loosened. She wasn't used to someone choosing to stay, not consistently, not calmly, not without asking her to shrink herself. Bradley. She began carefully. I've been doing this on my own for 4 years. I've built routines and shields and expectations. I don't know how to suddenly open all that up and let you in. You don't have to do it suddenly, he said, stepping closer. We can take it slow. Slow? Hazel laughed softly, tiredly. We skipped slow the moment you ran into the house and held them like you'd known them forever. He paused, absorbing her words. I didn't hold them because I thought I had a right, he answered. I held them because it felt like breathing, like something clicked into place without asking my permission. Hazel looked down at her hands. That's what scares me. Bradley pulled the chair closer and sat down, leaning toward her with quiet concentration. Tell me why. She hesitated. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud made it real. When people enter my life, she whispered, they usually leave just when I start to trust them. I don't let many people close. I can't afford the heartbreak, not for me, and especially not for them. Bradley didn't interrupt. He let her speak. I built my life around stability, she continued. Even when I was exhausted, even when I cried at night thinking about how much I was carrying alone, I'd rather struggle in peace than invite someone in and watch them walk away. Bradley's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in regret. I walked away once, he admitted. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how to stay. I was young, scared, tied to a life that didn't feel like mine. But Hazel, I'm not that man anymore. Hazel met his gaze for a moment, long enough for the tension in the room to shift. And I didn't know how to tell you I was pregnant, she whispered. I didn't even know how to tell myself. He nodded slowly. I get that, I really do. But Hazel, keeping it from me all this time, it hurts. I won't pretend it doesn't. Tears welled in her eyes again. Not dramatic tears, quiet ones, the kind that slip out when the truths you've buried finally rise. I know, she said quietly. I've replayed this moment in my head more times than I can count. I was afraid of ruining your future. Hazel, Bradley said gently, leaning closer. My future was incomplete without them. Without you, she inhaled shakily. Bradley continued. I can't change the years I missed, but I can choose what I do now. And I'm choosing to stay. I'm choosing to learn everything I missed. I'm choosing to show up for them, and for you, every day. Hazel's lips trembled. I don't know if I can trust that yet. That's fair, he said softly. Trust isn't something I expect you to hand back overnight. I'll earn it. The sincerity in his voice made Hazel's chest ache. For a man who had lived his life in boardrooms and negotiations, the vulnerability in his tone was disarming. And what about people? Hazel asked quietly. What about the looks we'll get, the assumptions, the comments? You know how people talk when they see a wealthy white man with a black woman and her twins? Bradley leaned back slightly, as if her words had landed exactly where she meant them to. I'm not blind to that, he said seriously, and I won't pretend I understand everything you've had to deal with. But I'm not going to let society decide what we deserve. Let them talk, let them stare, let them assume. He paused, voice deepening with conviction. What matters is how we move, not how they judge. Hazel looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time she saw not just the man from that summer night, not just the father discovering his children, but a man willing to fight for something real, something he had almost lost. Her eyes drifted again to the twins. They love you already, she whispered. Bradley smiled faintly. I know. And that terrifies me, in the best possible way. Hazel let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. You're dangerous. Dangerous? He tilted his head. How? Because you're saying all the right things, she replied, and part of me wants to believe every word. He moved a little closer, not enough to invade her space, but enough for her to feel the shift. Hazel, he said gently, believe the things I'm willing to prove. Their eyes locked again, this time with something warmer between them, something that wasn't fear or regret, something that had been waiting quietly under the surface. Romantic tension hung in the air, subtle but undeniable. Hazel broke eye contact first, clearing her throat. You should wake the boys soon. They need breakfast. Bradley didn't move right away. He stood slowly, his hand brushing hers for the briefest moment, not a full touch, but enough to remind them both that something had shifted. He walked toward the couch and knelt between Joshua and John. Hazel watched him with a soft expression she tried to hide. He nudged John gently. Buddy, time to wake up. John stirred, opening his eyes slowly before sitting up and rubbing them. Joshua followed after a moment, yawning loudly. Mommy awake? Joshua asked. Yes, Bradley said quietly, smiling. She's awake. The boys scrambled off the couch, running to Hazel's bedside. She immediately reached out to touch their cheeks, their hair, their little hands, grounding herself in them. Bradley stood behind them, watching the scene with something like awe. Hazel kissed the tops of their heads. As she held them close, she glanced up, meeting Bradley's eyes again. The trust wasn't rebuilt yet, but the foundation was forming, one careful brick at a time. By late afternoon, the hospital room had settled into a dull quiet. Hazel's vitals were stable. The boys had eaten. Bradley had helped them wash their hands in the tiny sink beside the cabinet, showing a gentler patience than Hazel expected from someone used to boardrooms and structured schedules. She kept watching him, not constantly, but enough that she noticed the way he adjusted to fatherhood in tiny human steps, the way he kneeled to tie Joshua's shoe, the way he reminded John to hold on to his elephant before he forgot it on the couch, the way he glanced at Hazel after every small task, checking if he was doing it right. And every time, Hazel's chest tugged with something she wasn't ready to name. She was tired, though. Bone-tired. A kind of tired that came not only from the collapse, but from the emotional weight she had carried alone for years. Bradley sensed it immediately. "You need rest," he said gently. "I'll take the boys for a walk, just around the hallway." Hazel hesitated. She hated letting them leave her sight, especially after what had happened, but she also trusted the way Bradley held their hands, firm but gentle, protective but not smothering. "Okay," she whispered, "but don't go far." He nodded. "Never." The boys waved as they left the room, Bradley guiding them down the hall. The door clicked shut. Hazel leaned back against the pillows, closing her eyes for a moment. She let the quiet sink into her like a warm blanket. Just as she began to drift, a soft vibration sounded from her bedside drawer. Her phone. She reached out slowly, slid the drawer open, and lifted it to her ear. "Hello?" she said weakly. A tense voice crackled through the receiver. "Where are you? What's going on?" "I've been trying to reach you." Hazel winced. It was Bradley's assistant, a woman she had never met but had seen tagged in his business articles online. The tone told Hazel everything she needed to know. This wasn't a friendly check-in. This was pressure calling. "I'm in the hospital," Hazel said quietly. A long pause. Then, "Bradley canceled every meeting today. Do you understand what that does to our schedule? Investors are asking where he is. A board member is furious. He didn't give me any details." Hazel swallowed, feeling her stomach twist. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "He's here with me." "There was an emergency." Another tense silence. "With you?" The assistant repeated, the disbelief sharp. "Hazel, look, I don't mean to overstep, but Bradley has a very demanding life. People depend on him. He cannot afford distractions." Hazel stiffened. "Distractions." "Miss," Hazel answered, keeping her voice steady. "He's with his children." "Children?" The woman's tone sharpened again. "He doesn't have children." Hazel's heart stuttered. She realized instantly what this meant. Bradley hadn't told anyone. Not a single person in his world knew. Not yet. Hazel tightened her grip on the phone. "He does now." Another long silence. Longer, heavier. "Hazel," the assistant finally said, "Bradley's family has expectations for him. His professional circle has expectations. This situation," Hazel's jaw clenched. Situation. She already knew how the world sometimes saw women like her. Black, single, raising twins. She had heard whispers before. People assuming things about her life, her choices, her worth. She wasn't hearing judgment for the first time. She was hearing it again, from someone who barely knew her. But this time, it carried an added sting. Bradley's world, the one she thought she'd safely avoided, was reaching into hers. "I appreciate your concern," Hazel said, her voice low but sharp enough to cut the air. "But Bradley's personal life is not something you manage." "Hazel," the assistant said again, voice tighter now, his image. Hazel ended the call. Her chest rose and fell fast, emotion swirling like a storm she didn't ask for. She placed the phone down, closed her eyes, and tried to steady her breathing. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Bradley wasn't as calm as he looked. The twins skipped beside him, each holding a hand, chatting about how they wanted pancakes when Mommy got better. Bradley smiled at them, responding gently. But inside, his phone, which he kept turned off, burned in his pocket like a ticking reminder. He knew his world would collide with this one. But he didn't expect it to collide this fast. He didn't expect the side comments, the questioning, the judgment, the assumptions. He didn't expect the quiet warnings that came with a certain type of wealth, the kind that demanded perfect narratives, clean lines, and predictable choices. He looked at the boys again, two small lives who had called him daddy without hesitation. Perfect narratives didn't matter anymore. He knelt down and straightened John's shirt. "You two doing okay?" he asked gently. Joshua nodded, hair bouncing. "Can we go see Mommy again now?" Bradley smiled faintly. "Yeah." Let's go. He led them back to the room, pushing aside the noise in his own head. When they walked back inside, Hazel looked up at them, trying to hide the tension still lingering in her chest. But Bradley saw it immediately. He read her expression the way he read market shifts, quickly, accurately, instinctively. He sent the boys toward the couch. Go play with your crayons there. As soon as they settled, Bradley moved closer to Hazel. What happened? He asked gently. Hazel hesitated, not because she doubted him, but because she didn't want to trigger the conflict simmering under the surface. Your assistant called, she finally said. She wanted to know why you canceled everything. Bradley's jaw tightened. And she made it sound like I'm a problem. Hazel looked down. Like the boys are a problem. Like you stepping into their lives is some kind of mistake. Bradley sat down immediately, leaning forward. Hazel, he said firmly, listen to me. You are not a problem. They are not a problem. And what anyone in my world thinks, assistant, colleague, board member, whoever, doesn't change the fact that this is my family. His voice was steady, but Hazel could hear the effort behind it, the tension of someone who understood exactly how quickly public perception could turn. Bradley, Hazel whispered, I don't want your world tearing ours apart. Bradley reached for her hand. I won't let it. Her eyes flicked to his, searching, the doubt still flickering beneath her ribs. You say that, she whispered, voice trembling, but I've seen what pressure does to people. You think you're strong enough. You think your position protects you. But people talk. People judge, and I can't have our boys caught in the middle of your world's expectations. Bradley squeezed her hand. That's why I'm telling you now, he said quietly. I'm choosing this world. Yours, theirs, ours. Hazel's throat tightened, but even as his words wrapped around her, another truth crept in, one she didn't want to voice. Bradley, she whispered, your world won't just walk away. They'll push back. They already are. He looked at her carefully, and in that split second, Hazel saw the smallest hint of conflict flicker behind his eyes. Not doubt about her, but the realization that his tidy, structured life was about to change permanently. Hazel exhaled slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared you'll get tired of the fight. Bradley didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't sugarcoat. He moved closer, lowering his voice with quiet honesty. Hazel, maybe for the first time in my life, the fight is worth it. Her breath caught, not because she doubted him, but because for the first time, she believed him. The day Hazel was discharged from the hospital, the air outside felt different, fresher, lighter, almost too bright after days of fluorescent ceilings and medical beeps. Hazel stepped carefully into the sunlight, her arm linked with Bradley's not because she couldn't walk alone, but because the ground felt uncertain beneath her. The twins walked ahead of them, each carrying a small hospital gift bag stuffed with stickers and crayons. Joshua kept looking back to make sure Hazel was behind him. John held his elephant tightly, as if afraid anything else might slip away. Bradley opened the passenger door of his SUV, helping Hazel inside. Take your time, he said softly. Hazel eased into the seat, exhaling slowly. Her body felt lighter but also fragile, as though one wrong move could undo everything. She watched the boys climb into their car seats, something Bradley had installed himself the night before with a seriousness that almost made her cry. He got behind the wheel and started the engine, glancing at Hazel. You good? She nodded. Just tired. You rest, he said. I'll get you all home. Home. Hazel looked at him. You mean your apartment? You're sure about that? He met her eyes without hesitation. Hazel, I'm not sending you back into that townhouse alone after everything that happened. You and the boys need support, and I want to be that support. Hazel looked out the window, her heart tighter than she wanted to admit. It's temporary, right? Just until I get my strength back. Until you feel safe, Bradley corrected quietly. Hazel didn't respond, but she didn't argue either. Bradley's temporary apartment wasn't extravagant by billionaire standards, but to Hazel it felt like stepping into a different world. Spacious, uncluttered, with warm lighting and soft beige couches that looked untouched. The moment they walked in, Joshua gasped. Mommy, look at the big TV. And the big couch, John added, running his hand across the fabric like it was velvet. Hazel smiled weakly. Boys, remember, we're guests here. Be respectful. It's okay, Bradley said, watching the twins with soft amusement. They can explore. This place hasn't had this much life in, well, ever. Hazel took off her shoes slowly, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and discomfort. She didn't belong in spaces like this. Her life had never looked this clean, this open, this easy. Bradley placed her bag down and moved to support her elbow again. "Sit down. I'll get you water." Hazel sat carefully on the couch. The cushions hugged her body in a way that almost made her emotional. She wasn't used to softness. Her life had been resilient edges and hard surfaces for years. Bradley returned with a glass, kneeling in front of her. "Small sips," he murmured. Hazel took it, their fingers brushing. She felt something warm shoot through her chest, the kind of warmth she'd buried under practicality and survival. The boys ran back into the living room, each holding a blanket Bradley had pulled from his closet. "This one mine?" Joshua asked excitedly. "That one's for both of you," Bradley said, ruffling his hair. Hazel watched him with a mix of awe and disbelief. He fit into their rhythm too easily, guiding them, laughing with them, adjusting his tone instinctively to their level. She hadn't expected him to adapt like this, and that scared her more than she wanted to admit. Later that evening, Bradley moved around the kitchen with sleeves rolled up, reading the instructions on a box of pasta like it was a contract. Hazel sat at the table, watching him. "You don't cook much, do you?" she asked gently. Bradley glanced at her over his shoulder. "I can make cereal. Does that count?" She laughed, a sound she hadn't made freely in days. "No, not even a little." The twins burst into the kitchen next, running around Bradley's legs like excited puppies. "Daddy, can we help?" John asked. Hazel stiffened at the word, the same way she had each time they said it. She wasn't rejecting it anymore. She was simply adjusting. Bradley didn't flinch. He knelt and hugged them both. "Yeah, you can help, but no touching the stove. Deal?" "Deal," they shouted in unison. Hazel leaned back in her chair, watching the three of them measure flour badly, spill salt accidentally, and drop pieces of pasta on the counter. It was chaotic, messy, loud, exactly the kind of chaos she had handled alone for years. Seeing Bradley in the middle of it, sleeves dusted with flour, hair slightly out of place, eyes glowing with something new, made her heart ache in a way she hadn't prepared for. He was learning fatherhood in real time, and he was good at it. When dinner was ready, the twins sat at the table, swinging their legs and humming songs between bites. "Mommy, this is yummy," Joshua declared. Hazel raised her eyebrows. "Is it?" Bradley smirked. "Be kind. I worked hard for that." Hazel met his eyes, smiling softly. "I can tell." That moment, that shared look, lingered longer than it should have. Warm, familiar, like a door cracking open to something they both remembered but hadn't touched in years. After dinner, Bradley cleaned the dishes while Hazel sat curled up on the couch, a blanket covering her legs. Her body felt heavy with fatigue, but her mind remained alert, absorbing every detail around her. The twins played quietly on the floor, building towers with blocks Bradley had bought earlier that day. Their laughter filled the room the way sunlight filled early morning windows. Bradley finished washing the dishes and walked over to her. "You okay?" Hazel nodded slowly. "This is a lot too much?" he asked, sitting beside her. "No," she said. "Just new can be good. New can be dangerous," she whispered without looking at him. Bradley leaned in slightly. "Hazel, I'm here, not just tonight, not just this week. I'm here." Her heart skipped, painfully. "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I mean it," he said. Their eyes met again. And for the first time since the night they danced together years ago, Hazel allowed herself to believe him, even if only for a moment. The twins climbed onto the couch, squeezing between them with tired smiles. Hazel wrapped an arm around Joshua. Bradley pulled John onto his lap. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. It wasn't planned. But it was real. And it was theirs. A new kind of family, fragile, forming, healing. Hazel woke before sunrise the next morning, not because her body was ready, but because years of motherhood had built the habit into her bones. The apartment was quiet, wrapped in that soft early morning stillness where thoughts feel heavier and truths feel louder. She sat up slowly on the couch, her blanket slipping down her shoulders. Bradley had insisted she take the couch bed while he slept in a separate room with the door cracked, just in case the boys needed anything. Hazel hadn't argued. She barely had the strength to. But now, as she looked around, something inside her tightened. This wasn't her home, and yet she felt safer here than she had in a long time. Her fingers traced the stitching on the blanket. She could hear faint breathing. The twins curled up on a small mattress near the couch, their chests rising and falling in sync. She smiled softly. Every time she saw them sleeping peacefully, something in her heart softened, like an old scar remembering how to heal. She got up slowly, walking toward the kitchen. There, standing barefoot in dim morning light, was Bradley. His hair was messy, his t-shirt slightly wrinkled, and he was holding a mug with steam curling upward. He looked nothing like the polished businessman she remembered. He looked real, approachable, human. Bradley turned when he heard her footsteps. His expression softened instantly. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Better," Hazel said quietly. "Just tired." He nodded, placing his own mug down. "Sit. I'll get you some tea." Hazel raised an eyebrow. "You know how to make tea?" Bradley smirked. "I read the box this time." She laughed, soft, unguarded. A sound that filled the space between them with something warm, something familiar. He moved around the kitchen with a certain awkwardness, clearly still learning the rhythm of domestic life, but Hazel found it endearing. He brought her the tea and sat across from her. Hazel blew on the steam, letting the warmth hit her face. She hadn't expected mornings in Bradley's place to feel this gentle. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked. "A little," he admitted. "I kept checking the hall to make sure the boys didn't wander." Hazel smiled. "They're not wanderers, but they're huggers." "Oh, I noticed," Bradley said with a soft laugh. "John climbed into my lap at 3 a.m. I woke up confused, holding him like a football." Hazel's laugh came out louder this time, surprising her. Bradley leaned back, eyes lingering on her, not in a possessive way, but in a remembering way. Like someone who had spent years thinking about a moment and finally found himself standing inside it again. Her laughter faded into a quiet smile. That's when the silence shifted. Not heavy, not awkward, just full, like the room understood something they hadn't said yet. Hazel looked away first, her fingers tightening around the mug. "Bradley," she began softly. "Do you remember that night, the last night we saw each other?" He lifted his eyes to hers. "I think about it more than I want to admit." Hazel's heart slipped a beat. Bradley continued, voice lower now. "You were wearing that sundress, the yellow one. You kept brushing your hair out of your face because the wind kept blowing it back. I remember thinking you were beautiful. I just didn't say it." Hazel breathed in slowly, the memory washing over her like warm water. She remembered it too, the music, the soft air, his hand on her waist as they danced under the string lights. She remembered the way he looked at her before he kissed her, slow and intentional, as if asking a question she answered without speaking. She remembered how alive she felt. She put the mug down carefully. "I didn't think you remembered anything about that night." Bradley leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Hazel, I remember everything. I was just too young and too scared to understand what it meant." Hazel blinked. "And now," he held her gaze, "now I'm older. And I'm done running from the things that matter." Her breath wavered, not because she didn't want to hear it, but because she wasn't sure she knew how to receive it. She looked away, steadying herself. "Bradley, so much has changed." "I know," he said softly, "but not everything." Hazel felt that sentence land right in the center of her chest. He stood slowly and walked toward her side of the table. Not too close, not invading, just enough to shorten the distance they had spent years widening. "Hazel," he said gently, "look at me." She lifted her eyes. He reached out his hand, open, not demanding. She hesitated. Her heart thudded. She wasn't sure she had the strength for this. Not after carrying the boys alone. Not after fighting so hard to stay grounded. Not after last night's call with his world crashing into hers. But the look in his eyes wasn't pressure. It was invitation. She placed her hand in his. Slowly, carefully, like testing the water before stepping in. His fingers closed around hers. Warm, sure, steady. "Hazel," he said quietly, "I'm not asking for everything today. I'm not asking for promises or decisions. I just want to be present. With you. With them. One day at a time." Her throat tightened. "I don't know if I can let myself fall again." Bradley sat beside her, turning slightly to face her fully. "You don't have to fall," he said. "You just have to let me stand with you." Hazel felt a tear slip from the corner of her eye. She wiped it quickly, embarrassed. He reached out, brushing his thumb gently across her cheek. The touch was soft, careful, the kind of touch that says, I remember you. I remember the way you looked at me years ago. I remember the softness in you that life tried to push down. Hazel didn't pull away this time. He lowered his hand slowly, giving her space to breathe. They sat there quietly for a long moment, two people relearning each other in the soft glow of morning light. Then Bradley spoke again, breaking the silence with something gentler than a whisper. Hazel, I'm not here because I feel responsible. I'm here because I care. I cared then, and I care now, more than I ever let myself say. Hazel closed her eyes, letting his words settle where old fears once lived. When she opened them again, Bradley was still watching her, patient, steady, willing to move at her pace. Hazel nodded once, small, but enough. A beginning. Not the explosive kind, not the dramatic kind. A quiet return, the kind that grows slowly but deeply. Bradley squeezed her hand gently before letting go, allowing her to breathe again, to settle, to exist without pressure. In the background, small footsteps pattered against the floor. The twins stumbled into the kitchen, rubbing their eyes, hair sticking up in all directions. Mommy, Joshua mumbled, climbing into her lap. John followed, putting his head against Bradley's leg as though it were instinct. Hazel smiled softly, wrapping her arms around Joshua. Across from her, Bradley placed a hand on John's back, warmth spreading through his chest. Hazel and Bradley shared a look that said, we don't have to force anything. We just have to be here. And for the first time since everything began, Hazel felt something unexpected. She felt ready for whatever came next. The day unfolded gently, as if the universe understood Hazel needed softness. The twins spent the afternoon building towers with blocks in the living room, while Hazel rested on the couch, her legs tucked beneath a blanket. Bradley moved around the apartment quietly, learning the rhythm of fatherhood in small, patient steps. He wasn't hovering, but Hazel noticed the way he kept glancing at her, making sure she was comfortable, hydrated, warm enough. She pretended not to see it, but deep down, it touched something buried and forgotten. As evening settled, warm orange light filled the apartment. Hazel watched Bradley help the boys brush their teeth, each of them standing on either side of him, mimicking his motions. She couldn't stop the small smile that tugged at her lips. When the twins were finally tucked into their little fold-out beds near her couch, Bradley dimmed the lamps and returned to her quietly. You need anything? He asked. Hazel shook her head. No. You've done enough today. He pulled a chair closer and sat beside her, resting his elbows on his knees the way he always did when he was processing something deeply. Hazel adjusted herself on the couch. You're thinking about something. Bradley gave a soft, breathy laugh. You can always tell. You're not exactly mysterious, she teased gently. He smirked. Fair. Moments passed. Quiet, but full. Then, Hazel shifted, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Bradley, what happens now? He raised his head slowly, meeting her eyes. What do you want to happen? Hazel's throat tightened. She hated that question because she didn't have an answer that felt safe. I don't know, she whispered. I'm scared. Bradley leaned forward. Of me? Hazel shook her head. Of everything that comes with you. I've lived my life one careful step at a time. You walk into a room, and the whole world shifts. I don't know how to protect the boys from that. He absorbed her words quietly. Hazel continued, voice trembling at the edges. I don't want them to be treated like an afterthought. I don't want them to grow up thinking they have to fit into your world like they're guests. They deserve to feel chosen, not tolerated. Bradley inhaled slowly, his expression changing, not into frustration, not into shock, but into something deeply gentle. He scooted closer, lowering his voice so the boys wouldn't wake. Hazel, look at me. She did, and what she saw disarmed her. A man trying, not to win her, not to fix her, but to understand her. Those boys, he said, are not an afterthought. They are not an accident. They are not something to hide or minimize. They're mine. I'm theirs. And nothing about my world changes that. Hazel blinked hard, swallowing back a wave of emotion. Bradley kept going, voice steady. I can handle my circle. I can handle my board. I can handle the opinions. But if I'm going to be in your life, in their lives, I need you to know something. Hazel held her breath. I'm not here to replace anything you built. I'm here to build with you. Hazel's heart cracked open, not painfully, but like a window letting in air she'd forgotten she needed. Her voice trembled. Bradley, I've been strong for so long, too long. and part of me doesn't know how to stop." He moved to sit beside her on the couch, careful not to overstep. His hand rested on the edge of the blanket. "You don't have to stop," he said softly. "You just don't have to do it alone." Hazel's chest tightened, her breath catching. "What if I let you in, and everything falls apart again?" Bradley reached for her hand, slow, deliberate, giving her the chance to pull away. She didn't. He intertwined their fingers gently. "Hazel, I won't pretend I have all the answers. I won't pretend I won't make mistakes, but I can promise you something real." She lifted her eyes to his. "I'm here," he said, voice steady with conviction. "And I'm staying. Not because I feel obligated, not because the boys need a father figure, but because I need all of you more than I ever admitted." Hazel's breath shook. Her eyes filled. She pressed her free hand against her mouth, overwhelmed by the tenderness in his words. "Bradley," she whispered, "you can't imagine how much I've wanted someone to say that and mean it." He brushed a tear from her cheek, lightly, reverently. "I mean it," he said again. She leaned into his touch without thinking. For Hazel, this wasn't passion. This wasn't lust. This was healing, slow, cautious, tender healing. She exhaled a long breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "I'm tired of being afraid," she whispered. "You don't have to be afraid with me," Bradley murmured. Hazel closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his shoulder, a gesture so intimate in its quietness that Bradley felt his own breath shift. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't fall apart. She simply allowed herself to rest, to lean for the first time in years. And Bradley held her. Not tightly, not possession-like, but safely, arms wrapped around her in a way that told her she was allowed to collapse without losing herself. After a long moment, Hazel pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. Bradley smiled softly. "Hey, before this next moment changes everything." Hazel blinked, confused. He looked at her gently, then glanced toward the camera that would one day recreate this moment for your audience. "Subscribe if you want more stories like this one," he said with a warmth that felt real, not scripted. Stories about growth, second chances, and families finding their way. Hazel gave a tired laugh, leaning back into the couch. "Smooth. Always," he teased. Their eyes met again, and this time Hazel didn't look away. She didn't hide. She didn't retreat. Her emotional walls, the walls that had kept her safe, kept her alone, kept her guarded, finally loosened. "Bradley," she whispered, "I think I'm ready." He exhaled softly, leaning closer. "Ready for what?" "To try again." Her voice trembled. Not from fear, from truth. Bradley's eyes softened, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "Then we'll try," he said. "Together." Hazel nodded, tears glimmering. The turning point wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and deeply human. She finally let him in. And Bradley, for the first time in his life, realized he'd found something worth protecting at all costs. Hazel hadn't stepped outside in days, not since the morning she collapsed in her kitchen. Her body had begun to regain its strength, but emotionally she still felt fragile, like a branch that had survived a storm but hadn't yet tested its own sturdiness. Bradley insisted on taking her back to the clinic for her final medical check. The appointment wasn't complicated, but Hazel dreaded being examined again. She hated the vulnerability of it, hated the reminder that her body had betrayed her without warning. But when she walked into the clinic holding Bradley's hand, something she didn't even notice she'd done until they were already inside, she realized she wasn't facing it alone. The boys sat in the waiting area with coloring books, their legs swinging off the chairs. Bradley kept glancing back at them to make sure they were okay. Hazel sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap. "You don't have to come in with me," she murmured. "I'm coming," he said softly. "Bradley." "I'm coming," he repeated, just as gently but with a firmness she couldn't argue with. She swallowed a small smile. When the nurse called her name, Bradley stood with her. Hazel felt a surge of nervousness, not from the appointment but from letting someone see her at her weakest. Inside the small exam room, Hazel sat on the table while Bradley stood by the counter, hands in his pockets, trying to look calm. The doctor entered a moment later. "Hazel," he began with a warm, steady tone, "your tests look good. Whatever happened was a combination of exhaustion and stress. Your body simply reached its limit." Hazel lowered her eyes, a quiet shame slipping through her. Bradley stepped forward. "What do we need to do to keep her healthy?" The doctor smiled, scribbling on his chart. "Rest, hydration, support. The good news is she's recovering well. She just can't keep running herself into the ground. Hazel exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief and frustration at the same time. She nodded. I understand. The doctor left them with a stack of papers and a gentle warning to take things slowly. When the door closed, Hazel let out a long breath. Bradley stepped closer. You okay? She shrugged lightly. I hate being reminded that I'm human. He smiled softly. That's not a weakness. To me, it feels like one. Bradley shook his head. Hazel, you've carried everything alone. Of course your body hit its limit, but you don't have to do that anymore. Hazel looked away. That's harder for me to believe than you think. He reached for her hand, not to hold it, but to rest his fingers lightly against hers. Then let me show you, not tell you. Hazel's throat tightened. They left the room quietly, the weight between them shifting from fear to something steadier, something real. Back at the apartment, the boys sprinted to Hazel the moment she stepped through the door. Mommy, look, we built a big castle. Hazel kneeled carefully, wrapping her arms around them. That's amazing, babies. Bradley bent down beside them. Who wants to show Mommy how tall it is? Both boys grabbed her hands, pulling her toward the blocks scattered across the living room. Hazel watched them proudly, but also with a strange ache, an ache she couldn't place at first. Then she understood. She wasn't doing this alone anymore. For 4 years, every milestone, every meltdown, every scraped knee, every bedtime story, she had carried it by herself. The weight had become normal. The exhaustion had become normal. Now, watching Bradley kneel beside the twins and help them rebuild a tower, Hazel realized she wasn't sure how to share the load. She wasn't sure how to let herself want the help she desperately needed. Bradley caught her watching, his eyes softening. You should sit, he said gently. Hazel nodded and eased onto the couch. Within minutes, Bradley was deeply involved in the boys' world, learning how to stack blocks without knocking them over, listening to their arguments about whose turn it was, guiding them with patience Hazel had never seen from him before. Joshua tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, make the roof. Hazel froze, the words still striking her heart in a way she hadn't grown used to. Bradley smiled. Okay, boss, roof coming up. The boys laughed, falling over each other in excitement. Hazel felt something shift inside her chest. Not panic, not fear. Something warm, something like recognition. This was what choosing each other looked like. Not big declarations, not dramatic scenes. Just this, the quiet blending of lives. Later that evening, Hazel stepped onto the balcony to get fresh air. The sky was turning shades of purple and gold as the sun sank behind the buildings. She leaned against the railing, letting the cool breeze soothe her. Bradley joined her a moment later, standing beside her without saying anything. You did good today, she said softly. He looked at her, confused. What do you mean? Helping the boys, asking the doctor the questions I was too tired to ask, making dinner last night, learning their routines, without complaining. Bradley breathed out slowly. Hazel, I'm not doing you a favor. This is my responsibility. My honor, actually. She closed her eyes briefly. You keep saying things like that, and each time, it chips away at the walls I built. I'm glad, he murmured. But it also scares me, she whispered. He nodded. I know. That's why I'm taking this one step at a time, and I'm not expecting you to trust everything immediately. Trust grows where consistency lives. Hazel turned her head toward him. He wasn't joking. He wasn't performing. He meant every word. And the boys? She asked. He smiled, a smile Hazel hadn't seen since the night they danced years ago. The boys are incredible. They're smart, they're funny, they're pure. And I want to be here for every moment I missed. Hazel's eyes softened. They already adore you. I adore them too, he said simply. Hazel inhaled deeply, the breeze brushing against her skin. She felt lighter than she had in months, maybe years. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't uncertainty. This was a man proving himself through actions, not promises. This was a family, not perfect, not polished, but forming with intention. Hazel looked out over the city, her voice low. Maybe we really are choosing each other. Bradley's hand brushed against hers on the railing. Not grabbing, not forcing, just resting close enough to say, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Hazel didn't pull away. Not this time, not anymore. That night, after the twins fell asleep and the apartment settled into a warm, quiet hum, Hazel sat alone on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The room smelled faintly of vanilla from the candle Bradley had lit earlier, an attempt to make the space feel more like home, though Hazel wasn't sure she deserved that kind of comfort yet. Bradley stepped out from the boys' room quietly, closing the door with the tenderness of someone who had learned quickly how to move around sleeping children. He walked over to Hazel, noticing immediately that her eyes were distant. "You're thinking hard," he murmured as he sat down beside her. Hazel didn't respond right away. She kept staring at the soft glow of the lamp, as if her thoughts were trapped somewhere deep inside her chest and she was afraid pulling them out would hurt too much. Bradley waited. He didn't push, didn't interrupt. He simply stayed near her, giving her enough silence to choose honesty when she was ready. After a long pause, Hazel exhaled and pulled the blanket tighter. "There's something I haven't told you," she whispered. Bradley turned slightly toward her. "Okay. I don't mean the boys," she continued quietly. "You already know that part, but there's something underneath it, something I've never said out loud." His face softened. "Take your time." Hazel closed her eyes, steadying her breath. "When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I wasn't ready. I didn't know how to tell anyone. But the hardest part was you." Bradley's brow lifted gently. "Me." Hazel nodded, opening her eyes again. "I didn't call because I was afraid of the answer." He blinked slowly, absorbing her words. "What answer?" Her voice shook slightly. "I was afraid that if I told you, you'd come out of obligation, not love. And I couldn't raise 2 babies around a man who didn't want to stay." Bradley's face changed, not with anger, but with a kind of heartbreak that settled quietly behind his eyes. Hazel looked away again. "I knew you were headed toward your family's expectations. I knew your world wasn't built for surprises like me. And I told myself that calling you would only make things worse. For me, for you, for them." She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. "But the truth is, I didn't trust myself with you." Bradley leaned in slightly, listening with his full attention. "When I met you," Hazel continued, "I liked you more than I should have. I tried to play it cool, but I felt something real. And when you left the next day without calling, I thought I'd misread everything. I told myself it was a moment, a mistake, something I should forget." She shook her head slowly. "Then the test came back positive, and I felt like I had failed everyone, myself, my mother, my boys, before they were even born." Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but Hazel lifted a hand slightly, asking for a few more seconds of courage. "I didn't know how to ask you to love something you didn't choose," she whispered. "And I couldn't bear the idea of you telling me you weren't ready, or that you'd step in for a few weeks then disappear. I couldn't let my sons grow up with someone walking in and out of their lives." Bradley's chest rose with a slow inhale. Hazel looked at him, eyes glassy but steady. "So I chose silence, not because I hated you, but because I cared too much to risk you leaving." The room went still. No hum from the air conditioner, no footsteps, no laughter from the boys, just Hazel's confession hanging in the air between them. Bradley leaned forward, resting his forearms on his thighs, his voice low and steady. "Hazel, I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I was scared of disappointing everyone around me. I didn't understand myself back then. I didn't know how to reach for what I really wanted." Hazel's eyes lowered. "And what did you want?" "You," he said without hesitation. She blinked hard, breath catching. "I didn't call because I thought you didn't want me," he continued. "I thought I had imagined everything that happened that night. I told myself you deserved someone better than a man trying to figure out who he was." He paused, voice softening. "But I didn't know I walked away from a family, from my sons, from the one woman who made me feel like I didn't have to pretend." Hazel's chin trembled, her hand covering her mouth again, a reaction she had when her emotions overflowed faster than she could contain them. Bradley scooted closer, lowering his voice. "Hazel, can I tell you something honestly?" She nodded. "I'm glad you told me now," he said. "Not because I'm glad I missed those years, I'm not, but because I know who I am today, and I know what I want today, and I can promise you with everything in me, I'm not a man who walks away from love anymore." Hazel wiped her tears slowly, but more kept coming. "You're saying all the right things," she whispered. "I'm saying the truth," he corrected, "and I'll show it every day until you believe it." Hazel looked at him, really looked at him, and saw no hesitation, no performance, no guilt-driven promises. Just a man choosing her because he wanted to, not because he had to, not because life pushed him, but because he recognized something he lost once and refused to lose again. Hazel's voice cracked as she whispered, "Bradley, I was so scared." He reached out, gently threading his fingers through hers. "You don't have to be scared anymore." Hazel leaned into him, not collapsing, not breaking, but surrendering a weight she had carried alone for too long. Bradley wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer in a slow, protective movement. Her head rested against his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. "You deserve to know," she whispered into his shirt, her voice thick. "I should have trusted you." "No," Bradley said softly, lifting her chin so she would look at him. "You protected yourself, you protected the boys, and now you're letting me in. That's what matters." A long breath escaped Hazel's lips. Her walls, the ones built from fear, exhaustion, and years of survival, finally loosened enough for something new to grow. Not certainty, not perfection, but possibility. "You're here now," she whispered. "And that's what I need." Bradley kissed her forehead gently. "And I'm not leaving." Hazel closed her eyes, holding on to that moment like a lifeline. She wasn't alone anymore. Not in motherhood, not in fear, not in love. For the first time in 4 years, she allowed herself to want this, to want him, to want a family built not on chance, but on choice. The next day unfolded slowly, like a long breath the family hadn't realized they were holding. Hazel woke to the sound of quiet laughter, the boys giggling as Bradley tried to comb their hair. She stretched under the blanket on the couch bed, letting the softness of the moment settle into her. She hadn't felt this kind of peace in years. Not loud peace, not the peace that announces itself, just a quiet, steady warmth, the kind that grows in the corners of a home. When she walked into the hallway, Bradley looked up immediately. His eyes softened in that way they only did around her. "Morning," he said. Hazel nodded. "Morning." The boys rushed to her, their hair unevenly combed and sticking out on the sides. "Mommy, look," John said proudly. "Daddy brushed my hair." Hazel tried not to laugh. Did he now? Bradley lifted his hands in surrender. In my defense, they kept moving. Hazel leaned against the doorway, her smile coming easily. "They never sit still. Welcome to my world." "I'm learning," Bradley said, slowly. "But I'm learning." Hazel's eyes softened. That was all she had ever wanted from someone, the willingness to learn her world, not replace it. Bradley suggested getting some fresh air. Hazel hesitated at first. Part of her still felt fragile, unsteady, but the boys were bouncing with energy, and the idea of being outdoors appealed to a part of her that had been shut away for too long. They walked to a small park a few blocks from the apartment. Hazel moved carefully beside Bradley, his hand hovering near her back just in case she needed support. The twins ran ahead, racing each other toward the open grass. The sun was beginning to set, streaks of orange and pink melting into the sky. Hazel stood watching the boys, her heart swelling as she saw them laugh freely, their curls glowing in the fading light. Bradley stepped beside her, sliding his hands into his pockets. "They're amazing." Hazel nodded. "They are." He glanced at Hazel, his voice softening. "You did that. You raised them into good kids." Hazel inhaled quietly. "I tried my best." "You didn't just try," he said. "You succeeded." Hazel's chest tightened with emotion, but this time it didn't hurt. It felt like someone finally acknowledging the years she had carried alone. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the boys chase each other in circles. Then Hazel turned toward Bradley. "Yesterday," she began, "everything I said, it wasn't easy, but it was the truth." "I know," he replied, "and it meant everything to me." Hazel looked down at her hands. "I've lived in survival mode for years. Even when things were calm, I was still bracing myself. I didn't know what it felt like to breathe next to someone." Bradley stepped closer, not touching her yet, but close enough that she felt his presence wrap around her like warmth. "You can breathe here," he whispered. Hazel exhaled shakily. "I want to. I really do. But stepping into this, stepping into us, it's terrifying." Bradley nodded slowly. "Then we go slow. We build one day at a time. No rush, no pressure, just honesty." Hazel lifted her eyes to him. "And what if I fall again?" "I'll catch you," he said softly. Her breath caught. He meant it, not as a line, not as a promise formed for the moment, but as truth. Not dramatic, not orchestrated, just real. The boys ran up to them, breathless, cheeks flushed from playing. "Mommy, Daddy, look." Joshua held up a crooked stick shaped vaguely like a heart. "For you," John added proudly. Hazel pressed a hand to her chest, feeling emotions rush through her too quickly to name. Bradley kneeled down, examining the twig heart with exaggerated seriousness. "This is perfect craftsmanship," he said. The boys beamed. Hazel laughed softly, shaking her head. "You two and your crafts." The twins ran back across the grass, leaving Hazel and Bradley alone again. Hazel watched them go, then spoke quietly, almost to herself. "They already feel like a family with you." Bradley looked at her. "We are a family." Hazel turned to him fully, the sunset casting warm light across her face. Her curls framed her cheeks, and there was a softness in her expression he hadn't seen since the night they first danced together. She stepped closer. "I want to choose that," she whispered. "I want it to choose us, not because I'm tired, not because I'm scared, but because for the first time in a long time, choosing someone doesn't feel like losing myself." Bradley's breath softened. "Hazel," he said gently. She lifted a hand, placing it over his heart, not forcefully, not dramatically, but with quiet certainty. "I want to try again, for real. Not the rushed summer version, not the scared version, the grown version, the honest version." Bradley's eyes glistened, barely, but enough for Hazel to notice. "Then I'm here," he whispered, and Hazel, finally, fully, stepped into his arms. He held her carefully, his hands resting on her back with a tenderness that made her feel safe in a way she didn't know she still needed. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in deeper orange. Hazel pulled back slightly, her hands still resting on his chest. Bradley leaned in, slowly, deliberately, giving her room to decide. Hazel lifted her chin just enough to meet him halfway. Their lips brushed in a soft kiss, gentle, warm, unhurried. Not passion, not desperation, just two hearts remembering each other the way they once did, and choosing to stay this time. The kiss ended quietly, with Hazel's forehead resting against his. Bradley smiled softly. "I've wanted that for a long time." Hazel breathed out a laugh. "I know." They stood together as the boys ran back toward them, squealing with excitement, their arms wrapping around Hazel's legs and Bradley's waist. Hazel looked up at Bradley again, the moment sealed between them. A new beginning, simple, natural, deeply human. Bradley pressed a kiss to Hazel's temple, then looked into the camera of your story's world with a warm, grounded tone. "Before we move into the next chapter of their lives, share this with someone who needs a reminder that love can return in unexpected ways." Hazel smiled, leaning into him, and together, with the twins hugging their legs and the sun dipping behind them, they walked forward into whatever future awaited them.